Hello, all you patrons. Welcome to another pre-show. Gather
It,
round.
it is summertime, and once again for this post-Midsummer Eve, you all are dressed beautifully, although kind of you see the two girls there, they've got those like Titania fairy wings on.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of a Midsummer Night's Dream kind of flavor, that guy's dressed like Puck. That's weird. Oh, all right. You know what, ladies and gentlemen, your patrons, if you feel like turning this into a Midsummer Night's Dream theme evening, I'm with you.
Hmm. Summertime and the living is easy.
The fish are jumping and the cotton are high.
The cotton
Your
are
daddy,
high.
the cotton are high. Yeah,
All
the
right.
cotton is high, I
The
guess.
cotton is high.
But
Yeah.
your daddy's rich and your mother's good looking. So hush, little baby, don't you cry. Some one of these days, you know something, you're gonna wake up singing. You're gonna stretch your arms. You're gonna reach to the sky. But until that morning, ain't nothing can harm you. So hush, little baby, don't you cry.
Is that like that Mama song? What? Mama's gonna give you a what? Is it?
Shortening, shortening.
No. No.
Mama's
Well,
gonna
that's
give
a
you a
different
diamond.
one.
Mama's gonna give you a diamond ring.
Yeah, that's right. That one.
No,
Oh.
that's totally different. The one is the summertime and living is easy is from Porgy and Bess,
Oh.
which was the first black musical done by oh gosh, I can't think of his name. Great composer. I can't believe I've gone blank on the guy's name. I know it as well as my own. Michael Feinstein is one of his big exponents. One of the great American composers, and I can't think of his bloody name. Well, oh, senility,
Hmm.
senility.
That's okay, Charles. All right, lots going on. I'm going to give a couple of shout outs here.
Okay,
Don from Florida says, proud to say that I became a father for the fourth time on June 10th, 2022.
White Rose Day.
Yes, our second son, Antonio Joseph Filippo, named after Saints Anthony of Padua, Joseph, and Philip Neri. Wow, you don't get any
Is
more
there?
Italian than that.
I was gonna say, is there a little Italian heritage going on, or
that's that's wow.
touch the old wop there?
Hey,
That's great.
watch your mouth. All right.
Sorry, Guinea, Dago. Why are you using terms like that? Let me tell you something. If your great uncle were still with us, I would be smacked around for that last couple of remarks. Okay? He wouldn't tolerate it. Neither should you.
Yesterday, we were incredibly blessed to baptize Antonio on such an important day in our country's history, as well as the feast of the Sacred Heart and Nativity of Saint John the Baptist. A
It
very,
sure was.
a
San
very,
Giovanni Battista.
yeah, very blessed day all around. All right, and Todd Bird, he actually had a comment on the previous pre-show. So
Yeah.
I had announced to everyone that it's free shipping over on orders over $30. And you said some things, but Todd Bird got it right. He says, we have always been at war with Eurasia. Free shipping and handling at Tumblr House has always been $30.
I guess that's true. What was I thinking? Congratulations on the baptism, by the way.
Oh yes, to Don. Yes, absolutely. But Todd Bird said politely requested when you mentioned the new shipping and handling fee next show, would you mind asking for prayers for my wife and unborn daughter? She will
Oh, yeah.
hopefully be delivering her next week.
Well, we asked for said prayers. Boy, everybody's having kids. It's like some sort of an epidemic.
I know.
You know, despite what they say about mixed marriages, you put a guy and a gal together in a married state, and sometimes their numbers grow. It's like with rabbits.
That's for sure.
A boy rabbit and a girl rabbit. And before you know it, you've got all sorts of pigeons.
Yeah, and they're ruining our climate and they're heating
I'll
the
say.
earth and
Let me tell you something, and this is for both Don and for Todd Bird. Your carbon imprint is growing exponentially as we speak.
it's sickening.
The fact that you're going to have people to take care of you when you're
It's
older, and that you won't be dying alone eating cat food doesn't make up for the fact that you're making people who matter uncomfortable.
You know what's shocking that I learned a few years ago is that people who are just, I guess, not Catholic and just sort of like, mainstream secular, they're
Yeah.
not actually aware at all on any level of the amount of love that occurs in a big family.
No, or even in a small one. I mean,
Or yeah,
you know,
or in a small, yeah.
I mean, I made the comment on Facebook and Twitter today, and I speak as a 61-year-old bachelor with 10 nephews and nieces from one brother and sister-in-law. Make that very plain. Um, Children can be a bloody nuisance when they're young, but if you give them a lot of counsel and love and discipline, then they are really more than worth it. And as I said, quite literally, my nephews and nieces saved my life some few years ago.
Mm,
So
wow.
you remember when Christmas Eve 2015, I got that infection. I almost died.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
they were the ones that Albert brought me to the emergency room and stayed with me. And then over the weeks of my recovery, when I had to have all sorts of essential things done, uh, they took care of everything, you know, and that's what families do for each other. But you have to instill that in them as you're raising them, and they can only, let's put it this way, never expect yourself to be more important to the young than they were to you.
Right.
I think that's the best way I can put it.
Right. All right. Patrick. Okay, so last pre-show, we start off the show strong, and I do the timestamp. It says mermaids, Bigfoot, Dietrich von Hildebrand. That was sort of the order, the beginning order of last pre-show. Patrick says mermaids, Bigfoot, Dietrich von Hildebrand sounds like a string of lyrics that would be in Charles's remake of "We Didn't Start the Fire."
Bigfoot, mermaids, frozen mammoths, Dietrich Hildebrand. We didn't start the fire. The world's been burning since the world's been turning. We didn't start the fire, but we tried to fight it. Yeah. Or it could be an alternative set of lyrics for Windmills of Your Mind.
Ooh.
Like a Bigfoot, like a mermaid with Dietrich von Hildebrand. Dee da dee 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 dee. And you're stuck in Sybil Brand. That's a women's prison. Like the morons that you'll find in the windmills of your mind.
All right. Lastly, Tampa Tobacconist, uh, new patron, I think. He says, or she says, is Don Vincenzo really interested in cryptozoology, or is he just looking for new employees for the 13th floor?
Ah, that's a good question. You know, that Bigfoot you employed as a assistant janitor, Rose was complaining about. She said that he's not very bright and he has a hard time understanding her commands. And I explained, you know, Rose, he's not quite human. And
Yeah,
she said, yeah, I can tell that by his work.
you'd think she'd be a little bit more patient and understanding.
Well, yeah, I mean, people are, well, beings of other species who aren't used to day jobs, you know, you really do have to give them a little more TLC, I think, certainly when they're starting out.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, I think so. That's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, look, could you, all right, let's say you went to an absolute five-star restaurant, but for whatever reason, financial or virtue signaling or whatever, they decided to replace their wait staff entirely with Bigfoot. You could not expect the same punctilio, the same. I mean, even Gordon Ramsay would admit you cannot expect the same thing out of Bigfoot waiters that you can out of human.
I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, yeah, I think so too. And they're a little rough around the edges, a little tall, a little, well, stinky, and it's the way they are. I don't see why people get so bent out of shape. Oh, we're going to eat there. They've got Bigfoot waiters. Yeah, snobs.
Makes me sick.
That's why you don't see too many Bigfoot run restaurants in this town of ours, because people are just such utter snobs about it.
Yeah, that is the only reason, to be honest. All right.
You go to a restaurant and there's no Bigfoot employed, you know that the customers are snobs.
Yes. All right. A question from James, who says, I recently listened to a podcast that discussed the fall of the Nabataean civilization. The Nabataeans, who built the ruined city of Petra, were master caravanners and traders who supplied the Mediterranean world with luxury goods like frankincense and myrrh during the days of Macedonian and Roman empires. The podcast stated that their civilization collapsed alongside the price of incense because demand for incense plummeted following the empire's conversion to Christianity. The podcast stated that unlike Catholics and Eastern Orthodox of today, the early Christians did not use incense at all to differentiate themselves from the pagans. Is this an accurate description of the church in the days of the fathers of the church? If so, when was incense reincorporated into the Mass? And if the claim that early Orthodox Christians did not use incense is not true, what caused the downfall of the Nabataeans? Wow.
Okay, well, first, you've got a couple of things to unpack here.
Yeah.
The earliest accounts of incense, the earliest specific accounts we have, only go back to the 400s. That's true. But there are prayers that mention it. The Jews used it. It's in the New Testament. It's quite possible, although we don't know, that what we do know is that after the church became legal under Constantine, our worship became very rapidly much more elaborate in order to better express the mysteries of the faith. And that was a natural development since we're no longer hiding out. Um, as far as the Nabataeans go, I don't think so, because the pagan cults were still big in Rome into the 400s when Theodosius suppressed them. So that really wouldn't make any sense. But two things did happen. One was Rome conquered the Nabataeans, so that was kind of an end to them. But the other thing, as far as the incense trade goes, is that it came from India through the Arabian countries. But at that period, at that time, the Romans began trading directly with India via ship, thus completely cutting out the Arab middlemen, and that really cut into their money. So that might have had some effect on the Nabataeans and made them easier to conquer. Certainly, had they been the sole source of incense, the Romans would have been far less likely to conquer them. So it might be that the shifting of the trade route to the sea made the Nabataeans no longer indispensable, and so Rome, took care of them. Now it's interesting that after the fall of Rome in Byzantine days, before the Arab invasion, the Nabatean areas were taken over by another Arab clan called the Ghassanids, and they still have descendants today, supposedly. But the Ghassanid Empire or Ghassanid Kingdom was obliterated by the Muslims. So there you go.
So, I'm a little confused. So you said Rome was trading with India for
Yeah,
incense?
directly by ship.
What is that route like? Is that just through the Mediterranean and then it's like somewhere like at Lebanon or
No, it's from
where's?
what we call the Gulf of Eilat. Uh, you look at the Sinai Peninsula if you're looking at a map, and you see where Israel goes down the southernmost point.
Um,
Remember, Rome had Egypt. Egypt had ports on the Red Sea. And so it was from those ports that their trade with India was carried on by ship.
Wait, like wait, so you're talking about through the Suez Canal?
No, there was no Suez Canal then.
Oh.
I'm talking about the Egyptian ports that were actually on the Red Sea.
Okay. I see.
And then they would go from the Red Sea ports by land to Alexandria, and then from there all over the empire.
Okay, so there's a little. Okay, I think I get it. Okay, interesting. That makes sense.
You know? So I suppose that once their indispensability and their financial background collapsed, they were easy pickings for the Romans. Petra, the rose-red city, half as old as time.
All right.
That's not a Billy Joel reference.
Huh. All right. Question from Micah.
Yes. Micah.
He says, Charles, on June 13th, the great Catholic king of Bavaria, Ludwig II, died under mysterious circumstances. I say he was assassinated by the political establishment of Bavaria. What is your opinion on the great patron of the arts and architecture?
Well, his death, like the death of Crown Prince Rudolph at Meyerling, like the Kennedy assassination, has been a source of mystery ever since it began. And all sorts of people say all sorts of things about Ludwig. What we know for sure is that he was a great patron of the arts, as you say. He loved the arts. His faith was somewhat, he wasn't the greatest practitioner of Catholicism, but he wasn't apostate either. So he's better than Joe Biden anyway. And his taste in art and architecture, I mean, they always talk about how he nearly bankrupted the Bavarian treasury on his expenditures. I don't know how true that is, but I do know that it has since been enormously compensated for by the armies of tourists that have come to see them ever since he died.
Yeah.
And of course, it's a well-known fact that he was inspired in his greatest creation, Neuschwanstein, by Sleeping Beauty's castle at Disneyland.
Really? He was inspired by that? Yeah.
He was a big Walt Disney fan.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. Yeah, that makes sense.
He saw Cinderella and he wanted to build a castle just like it. Well, I mean, the other idea would be that Walt Disney was inspired by Neuschwanstein. And do you really want to go on record as saying that an American was inspired to do something beautiful by some foreign king? Do you really want to go on record saying that?
No, I don't.
Especially in an election year.
Definitely not.
So who inspired whom?
I'll go with your story.
Disney inspired King Ludwig, right?
Yeah. Right. I don't think anyone will have a problem with that.
Not in an election year, they won't.
Okay.
No, but seriously, you judge a man by his fruits, you shall know him, and the fruits he left behind were utterly beautiful. Schwangau. He built some really Linderhof. He built some beautiful palaces.
One of the things you said about Ludwig, was it being not the best practicing Catholic? That sparked a thought in my mind. My wife and I had watched yesterday. Was it The King's Daughter, which is a kind of a new release. And it's fictional. Pierce Brosnan plays the Sun King, Louis
XIV.
Yeah, and I guess he wants to live forever. He's super powerful, wants to live forever, and I guess he needed to capture and kill a mermaid or something like that. But the nature of, because he's a huge womanizer, but also very devout. And so I was like, I admittedly did not know much about Louis XIV. So I looked him up, and again, from a simple Wikipedia search, it looks like, wow, that's quite a list of women and mistresses. and then it looked like he was also very devout. And
Well, which is true. But
yeah.
of course, toward the end of his life, it began to catch up with him. Uh, it started when his queen died
Uh,
because everybody loved her. She was a simple girl, and he only realized how much she loved him when she died,
oh.
and he began to feel like a piece of garbage. But
Mm,
then he set his cap for a lady named Madame de Maintenon, who was a widow with children. But she would not be his mistress unless he married her. So he married her morganatically, which is why none of their children are heirs, none of their descendants are heirs to the throne of France. But so the last 10 years maybe of his life, he was quite old, but the last 10 years of his life were much more upright than the rest of it. Uh, and you got to understand too that he had underwent a long regency when he was a kid, and one of the things about the courts of that era was that very often, if you had a young heir to the throne, various people would try to corrupt them in hopes of getting them more or less in their power for when they would be king.
mm-hmm.
Oddly enough, was a strategy that rarely worked. It did sometimes, but rarely, because usually what would happen is that the guy would be corrupt, all right, but once he became king, he was CEO,
Yeah.
and that's an unfortunate reality of life anywhere at any time. Um, and as I say, the death of the Queen affected him because, interesting enough, something similar happened with Charles II of England, who was
Mm,
also a big womanizer. But when his Queen died, he came to realize just how much she had loved him, and he was sort of used to ignoring her. But then she died, and he realized that nobody had really cared for him the way she did. And that realization was for both men in their respective times a real kick in the head. That's why, now love is a funny thing.
yeah.
And I've known quite a number of women through the years who were devoted to womanizers. And I could never see it myself, oddly enough. If I were in their shoes, I'd drop kick them into next week. But people are funny.
Yeah. You don't know what you got till it's gone. They
Yeah.
paved paradise and put up a parking lot. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I just couldn't
Daddy,
resist.
won't you take me back to Muhlenberg County, down the Green River where paradise lay? I'm sorry, my son, but you're too late in asking. Mr. Pippity's coal thing done bore it away.
All right. Question from Mason, who says, "I have a question for the show concerning Tolstoy's *War and Peace*, which I've been reading, and would greatly appreciate it if it could be answered. The book discusses poor pilgrim beggars known as God's folk, who would walk huge distances to important holy places. The index says that many of them had disabilities and thus could not work. I cannot find much information about them online and was wondering what Charles knows of this phenomenon in Imperial Russia. Furthermore, were there any Catholic equivalents to the God's folk of Orthodox Russia?"
Well, I know that they existed and that they would wander from shrine to shrine, picking up alms on the way and praying. And yeah, you did have the equivalent uh, in Catholic circles, certainly in the Middle Ages. But as late as the 18th century, Saint Benedict Joseph Labre was just such a person who spent his time going from shrine to shrine and lived off alms. It was interesting that when he died, his body was all horrific, but at death, it cleaned up. And seeing it was what converted Father John Thayer, the future Father John Thayer, an American on the Grand Tour, to the Catholic faith. So it was a real thing, all right, both East and West. Even in our California missions, we had people that would live by going from one mission to the next.
All right. Wade says, my wife and I enjoyed an incredible trip to Madeira to visit the resting place of Blessed Emperor Karl. And we recommend everyone who has an opportunity should do the same.
I agree.
Second, I served as a best man for the first time and appreciate the brief coaching from the segment done prior to Vincent's wedding of the best man extraordinaire. Thank you, Charles.
Very welcome.
I also have a question. In the opening presentation of the Eucharistic revival, the U.S. bishops are starting to draw the faithful into our local bishop mentioned actively participating in the Mass. What is active participation, and are there any resources to assist in making us all better participants and letting the glory rain down on us during the liturgy?
Oh, the glory got to rain down with Mother Knowledge prayer shawl. All right. Well, okay. Active participation in the liturgy is something that people have been talking about since the 60s. What is it really? Well, it's a prayerful attention to the Mass, not being distracted. But this can take many different forms. At Vatican II, a lot of people believe that meant having the people take the place of the altar boys and engage in a dialogue with the priest. Cardinal MacIntyre very famously said there and then about that in that case, participation is distraction. I would say that there are a number of ways of participating at Mass. Your own prayers. There were prayer books that had books of prayers following in the missal. But even if you see someone just saying the rosary, it doesn't mean they're not participating. One of the major complaints against the traditional liturgy has been that the laity were, quote unquote, reduced to spectators. No, they weren't. Not at all. It's interesting that in the book Hammer and Mitre and Crook about the, I forget the name of the priest now, he died a few years ago, but he wrote this novel about a bishop who's dying and decides to bring back the Tridentine Mass in his diocese. So he's talking to an old English woman, and he asks her how she participates in the Mass. And she says, I just look at the tabernacle, and I loves. My dad used to say, when I asked him what the council fathers meant by participation, he said, making sure you were in on the collection. But that's the real participation, is if you pay up.
I'm really debating whether I should be strong-worded or just what to say here. There's so many things to say.
Well, I mean, the problem is that everyone has to experience the Mass in their own way. There's no one size fits all.
I mean, if I'm being honest, I think what active participation is a poor substitute for is people who are not mentally engaged and not saying and thinking the prayers, so they can sort of do this. It's easier to do actions. It's harder to be present mentally.
Yeah.
In my opinion, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, it's just a question of how you focus in on it.
It's like, for example, some newcomers to the Latin Mass. You know, it's like, how'd you like it? And what's the most popular answer? It's long. What does that mean?
Well, there's a person who wasn't participating.
Well, exactly. That means you weren't engaged. And admittedly, as a kid, when I was going, That was basically my answer and my thought. But that's
Well, but
on
you
me.
were a kid and you grew up.
Yeah.
And see, the thing is too that the method of participation, you'll find if you're quote unquote participating, and by that I don't necessarily mean responding, you'll find the time goes by very quickly.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
And the only time it may slow is during the sermon.
I mean, even during the gradual, actually, the two favorite parts of the mass to me, I happen to go to high mass. But the two favorite parts are the gradual, where everybody's just kind of quiet, and it's a nice time to meditate. But I do personally love the credo,
Yeah.
when because the whole church knows the song, and so it's like it's just great for the whole congregation to just let the song rise up and just sing it in this, and just the energy that comes out of the credo. And I do like the tune of the credo too.
Well,
But so
I have to admit that the asperges is one of my favorites. There's
Asperges,
something
yeah.
about the sprinkling with the holy water.
Well, that too. Everybody knows the Asperges as well, so that's also a loud one, right? Like,
Yeah,
and a beautiful
but
tune.
it has that sprinkling with the holy water has such a powerful feeling for me. And of course, obviously the reception of communion is quite a thing. Uh, Now the great thing too is that in the old mass, the traditional mass, unlike sometimes the new, you get a sufficient amount of time once you come back from communion to really meditate on what it is you've done and to pray. Whereas so often with the Novus Ordo, you know,
No,
before you know what you're doing, the mass is over.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I feel like Cardinal Sarah said it best, where he says, "Don't feel the pressure, or don't feel that you need to do something to
No,
participate in the mass."
no.
You know?
And in fact, if you feel that you have to, that's probably not a good sign.
Yeah,
I mean, you're there because he's there. He's called you to him. Um, and it's funny for me right now because here where I am, we have the Byzantine liturgy every day, as well as the new mass every day.
yeah,
Um, and then during the school year, we have the traditional mass. And of course, I could go up to Vienna on Sunday. I couldn't today. I had to miss out on the high mass I would normally have gone to in the Paulanerkirche because I had to be home for something this evening. I had to do something. I don't remember what it was, but I had to be here, and I wouldn't have been here if I'd gone to the mass. But I have to admit, I love double dipping.
mm,
In other words, going to the Byzantine liturgy in the morning and then the Tridentine in the evening. And there are certain feasts that I like to do both. Pentecost in particular. I love doing both Byzantine and Tridentine on Pentecost.
Can you receive communion from both?
You can
Oh, okay. If you could only
twice.
do If you could only do one, would you receive from Byzantine or the TLM?
I'd flip a coin.
Really?
Yep.
Okay, I was wondering
Well, see,
if you wanted the crouton with the wine, or the
well, they're both
they're
such
both
different
yeah,
experiences,
yeah,
and they're both different experiences. And one of the things that I always remind myself when I'm praying to him after receiving, especially if it's a day when I've had both, is how wonderful it is that he comes into such very different manners.
yeah.
They're the same, but they're different. And then uh, the other alternative we have here during the school year is the Syro-Malabar Kurbana. Well, the Syro-Malabar rite features a host intincted in the precious blood, and that is a third and very different way. The fourth, of course, is the Anglican ordinariate style, where you receive a host, and then the priest lifts the chalice to your lips. And of course, and this is one of the great mysteries of early Catholic life in the 60s, when the church began in the 1960s. It didn't exist before. But when they reintroduced communion in both kinds into the Latin Rite, initially, the priest held the chalice, brought it to your lips, you took a sip, you wiped it, and went on to the next person after the host, you see. And that's how the Anglican Ordinariate do it. But in the Novus Ordo, the practice of the lay people handing it back and forth developed, I don't know, in the 70s sometime, I guess. And the thing is, I really don't mind receiving in both kinds, even in the Latin Rite, if it were done the way the Anglican Ordinariate do it, or through intinction. And in fact, with the Novus Ordo, I welcome intinction. Can you guess why?
Why?
No communion in the hand.
Mm.
And in fact, I don't want to say where, but it was Immaculate Conception. There was one old priest. I used to love to go to him because he gave the host out with intinction, and so there was no communion in the hand at that mass. As you can imagine, at one point, Cardinal Mahoney did what's called the ultra vires and banned intinction in the Archdiocese of LA, precisely to make sure that communion in the hand was available.
Bad touch.
Yeah, bad touch indeed, Your Elegance. Bad touch indeed. But the best comment on Cardinal Mahoney's works and pomps, was my dad again. Shortly after Roger became Archbishop of Los Angeles, he wrote a thing on the Eucharist called "The Day on Which We Gather," in which he declared that in the simple acts of breaking the bread and blessing the cup, Christ is present in memory and in hope. And my dad said, "Oh, that's wonderful. And that's the way my money will be in his collection plate. In memory and hope."
I reused that. Well, I reused that during COVID. I adapted it to COVID.
Yeah, well, I think so. The Father, all you need is a spiritual act of collection. What? No, it's just as good for them as it is for us. A spiritual act of collection and a perfect act of financial acceptance. And then you got all the money you need. Just like we don't need the sacraments other than in a purely spiritual way. You don't need money other than in a purely spiritual way. Same thing.
Oh.
You don't think so? Makes perfect sense to me. You give what you get. You offer Mass, you give out the sacraments, you get money in return. You don't, you don't. And you say, we don't need the sacraments. Great, you don't need money. See how easy that is? How simple? Money would only be necessary for the church if the sacraments were necessary for the communicant.
You know what? For the LA Archdiocese, what I see, and I keep thinking of you every time I see it, because I see it right next to St. Rita's. I see it all these places. Oh man, this is gonna elicit such a reaction from you. It's a solicitation to donate to the priest, the retirement fund for priests, Holy Priesthood Forever or something. It says something like that, and I just always think of you because.
Why would I do that?
I don't know.
Priests, for the most part, the priests who are retiring now were the priests who ruined everything.
Exactly. That's why I always think.
I mean, let them reap the fruit that they've planted.
Exactly. There's no one left, so now you have nothing to reap.
No, well, that's too bad. Should have thought of that when you were stupid. No, I mean, Mind you, if they were willing to repent, I'd be happy to contribute.
Yeah.
If they would say something like, "We're sorry we ruined everything, but we're old now and we don't want to starve." You know what? Here you go. Here's a check. That took a man to say that, Father, not a mouse.
That's very true. I doubt that will happen, though, but if it should happen.
But why do you doubt?
Because I'm cynical about
Do you
human
believe in
nature.
fairies?
I'm agnostic.
How about Tinkerbell?
No, I killed her.
You killed Tinkerbell?
I ripped her wings off.
Little Tink?
Little.
I saw Little Tink. I saw Peter Pan today. You ripped the wings off Tinkerbell. You're a bad man. If I had psychic powers, you'd be in the cornfield right now, buddy. Rip the wings off Tinkerbell. I'll tell you what, nobody smacks around Little Tink on my watch.
Oh, man.
Better not let Tyrone find out. He's a Tinkerbell devotee.
All right. That'll do it for the pre-show, everyone. But
All right.
Stay tuned. Full episode coming out right at you.
And as you know, we are in the immediate aftermath, ladies and gentlemen, of the destruction of the civil rights of every woman in America. Dun, dun, dun. What?
We're going to end on that. We're going to end right there. All right.
All right. We'll see you soon.